I am ready whenever you are.
Okay, good. So yeah, I don't know if you had a chance or if Jacqueline had forwarded on. There's one or two questions I like to start with to kick things off around, because the theme of the podcast is getting out of your own way. Even though, of course, it ends up going on to success habits and all those other types of things. So I've got a couple of questions I typically like to start with. One is a kind of a choice. So it would either be, if you had to pick one thing that's helped you most with getting out of your own way, what would it be? I don't know if that's the obvious answer that I think you're going to answer, but that's fine too. Very helpful. Or it's sort of I suppose the day when you hit the dumps the most, in terms of, a day where you just sort of said, okay, I've had enough with where things are going. I don't know if that's your daughter throwing pizza at your story. I'm guessing from the bits and bobs I've seen on your website. But which would you rather be asked or prefer to answer?
You know what? The first one would be great. Because I feel like I talk a lot about like the days that I've had many like worse days. So yeah, the first one would be great.
Okay, perfect. That's all I really need to know. Other than that, you mentioned background noises, water. As you know, it's not live, so we can always edit things out if for some reason you want to change your mind on an answer. And then do you still have until noon?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Good.
I kind of, if possible, I have about 45 minutes just because I have to be somewhere at noon. So.
Okay, so what time do you want to be done? Because that's, if I know, I can work.
Yeah, so 11:50, so my time. So 45 minutes from now. Let me just turn this thing off so no noise. All right.
No, it's good to know. Excellent. Otherwise, I just do a countdown from 3 and we kick things off. I don't think I have anything else to ask you. Brilliant. Okay, so do you have any questions for me?
I am good. Wherever you want to go.
Okay, brilliant. All right. And just in case you'd forgotten, it was Dave Altman that introduced us a while back. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Busy lives, easy to forget stuff. So anyway, okay, so 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Anderson, and welcome to The Road Not Taken, How Ordinary People Got Out of Their Own Way, and You Can Too. I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, CHRIS WINFIELD, who is the co-founder and CEO of Super Connector Media. Chris, I'm just going to read over your bio briefly to introduce you to the audience. Chris is a serial entrepreneur who's created the Unfair Advantage Live, the world's premier publicity event connecting entrepreneurs to the media, and the Unfair Advantage Accelerator program, supporting entrepreneurs through publicity and marketing into the next level of their businesses. And a little more on Chris's background. So prior to his current company, Super Connector Media, he worked with executives for many of the world's best-known companies. So I'm kind of curious to ask about this, Chris, including Disney, Virgin, Macy's, Viacom, Conde Nast, NBC, and many others. To put it simply, Chris gives entrepreneurs an unfair advantage when it comes to getting more publicity, making connections, and growing their companies. Chris currently lives in New York City with his daughter, Vivian, his life and business partner, Jen Gottlieb, and their 3 dogs. That's a lot of dogs. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is a lot of dogs.
I thought one was enough, and that was in a fairly rural area. Anyway, so kicking things off, I always like to ask with a sort of a very specific question around getting out of your own way, which is around adversity. So, for you, if you had to pick one thing around that's helped you most, get out of your own way and handle adversity, what would you say it's been?
So I think it would actually be 2 things. I was just thinking about it, and there are 2 immediate things came to my mind. So being able to ask for help and connect with other people, I think that has been unbelievably important and instrumental for me. And just, I was never that person. So I would have an issue, and then I would want to try to solve it or not solve it and ignore it. And by opening up, connecting with people more, that has been such an unbelievable just change for me in being able to get out of my own way. And that's not just like every now and then, that's on a daily basis, because the reality is that's what it is. I mean, each day I come across things that are challenges I can easily get stuck. And I'm talking about from the second I wake up in the morning, there will be something like I had a thought this morning that came, and, I made that conscious decision to choose faith over fear, and because I think that's one of the things. So that's the first one. And then directly related to that is a relationship with something greater than myself. So for me, that's God, but just something outside of me that makes all the difference for me.
And can you say a bit more about that? Because it makes all the difference. I mean, that's a really strong statement. So in what way?
So I used to, I didn't really have any relationship with anything outside of me, other than, other people or family or whatever, but no belief, no relationship with God in any way. And for me, that meant having to do everything on my own. And also, it's kind of for me, it was, and again, I always just talk about from my perspective, my own experience. Like, I don't ever try to say, oh, this is how it should be for everyone, because everyone's path is different, and what works for people and what their beliefs are different. But for me, it was the difference between thinking I'm here and doing everything on my own, and the other side, and what I believe now, is that there's something greater than me that that wants me to reach my potential. It wants me to be able to help as many people as possible each day, and that's God, that's the universe, and that thinking changed my entire life.
And was that a process that you went through, or was it an epiphany?
Oh, it's a continual process. It's a continual. So for me, where that started was just over 8.5 years ago. I got sober. I've been sober for 8.5 years. Pretty much from the time I was 13 to the time I got sober, I drank and used drugs, pretty much every single day of my life. And, I had been successful. Things looked good on the outside, but I was completely miserable. I was completely broken. And so that was the beginning of it. And then, but it was a continual, gradual process. And it still is. But, just over 6 years ago, I lost pretty much everything. I had a business grown to about 100 people, and a bunch of offices. Again, it looked great on the outside. And I wound up losing everything. And that was, again, like a process of turning it over and relying on something, greater than me to get me through that, but then also to lead me to something so much greater. Mm-hmm. So I was being interviewed yesterday for a documentary about money. And, the guy was asking me just different questions about like beliefs and things like that. And, I remember saying to him that, if you had told me 9 years ago what my life was going to look like today and how good it is, and that doesn't mean that there's not challenges or anything like that, but how absolutely unbelievable, I would not have believed you. Now, that process, like that has come from, not just from me and not just from working hard or anything like that. That's part of it, but also just the new beliefs that I've been able to, change my mind with. And when we do that, everything like that the mindset shift was the biggest thing for me.
It's funny. It's something I'm working on for myself at the moment. So how have you done that? Because it can sound really straightforward. And I think when you're on the receiving end of like listening to this, sometimes it's like, I'll never forget years and years ago, I was listening to Stephen Covey. I was a big fan of his in the 90s and whatever beyond. But I always remember this line about where he said, if you want to change your life, you have to change your paradigms. I remember thinking, well, that sounds pretty straightforward. So what the hell's a paradigm? And he'd give the same example over and over again about if you've got a map of Detroit, but you're trying to find your way around Chicago, it's no use. I'm thinking, I don't understand what he's talking about. So, and I'm not trying to criticize him. He's he did amazing work. All I'm saying is it took me a long, long time. And so I always, I don't know, maybe it's a kind of an excuse of my own sometimes when people say, you just need to change your paradigm or change your mindset. I think I'm working on it, but talk us through what you did to change your beliefs and I'd rather you focused on that because the faith piece I also want to ask about, but anyway, but start with beliefs if you could.
Yeah. So I think the big thing is the first part. I think when people say things like that, or like you're listening to this and you're like, what is this guy talking about? The first thing that I think that's important is that's okay. Like that reaction is completely okay. And for me, what it was continually getting to points in my life where I knew what I was doing, how I was thinking, how I was acting, how I was, the things that I believed were not working for me.
Yeah.
They were not working for me. So even if they were working in, let's say, a financial way, they weren't working in an emotional, spiritual way. And then, for me, it's been a process of just like acknowledging that. So acknowledging that I don't have all the answers. And I used to be somebody that had to be right at all costs, even when I was wrong. And I didn't want to hear anything else. And, I got to the point where I was ready to change. Mm-hmm. And, there's a great saying. It's like when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you're going to be ready to make a change. So the important thing I think to know is that it's not about like listening to something like this or, for you to just all of a sudden you have to change everything completely. It's not about that. Mm-hmm. The thing that I look for and the number that I keep in mind at all times is 51%. So what I had to do, I had to be at a place where I wanted change and was ready to believe in, things other than what I thought and what I was, my beliefs a little bit more than I didn't. So the 51% of me had to want it a little tiny bit more than the 49% that was like, oh, that's BS. Like, don't worry about that. That's not how it is. Like, relax, this guy talking about God or, money or whatever. And because that didn't work for me, that pessimistic, skeptical person that was selfish and had to always be right, like that was not working for me. And I've rarely ever met anyone that does work for. To be honest, I've never met anyone. And again, like it's easy to conflate material wealth or something with, being happy and being successful. Because I know a lot of really, really, really materially successful people that are very miserable, and vice versa. So I think that's the important part. And for me, what the things that have probably had the biggest impact on my life and and changing around this have been books. I remember I read, 6 years ago when all this stuff happened with this one company and I pretty much lost everything. It was all public and it was horrible. I hated it. And I was ready to change at that point. And I remember I discovered this one book and it was called Choose Yourself by a guy named James Altucher. And I started reading that book and it was just so unbelievably powerful for me. And I found him through like an article and who knows, like just one of these things, like the dots connecting.
Sure.
And so I wound up reading that, and then it changed something in me so much because he talks about the importance of a daily routine and writing down ideas and all these different things. And so I started reading everything that I could by this guy, every single thing he had ever written. And then one of the things he mentioned in one of his books or an interview or something was a book called The Science of Getting Rich by a guy named Wallace D. Wattles. So that book was written in 1910 by this guy, Wallace D. Wattles. And I started reading that, and it was so unbelievably powerful, but I also didn't completely understand it. I literally had to read it it's a short book, it's 100 pages. I literally had to read it about 20 times before it started to really make sense. And in that book, he talks about, just the power of your mind, how, we're universal, we're part of the universal mind and all these different things, and the importance of gratitude, the importance of doing things in a certain way and, putting the most effort into it. And that book literally changed my mind. Mm-hmm. And I've read that book probably 150, 200 times, and I've given it to probably 500 people. And and there's been a lot of other books like that, but I think that's, I think sometimes we think we have to do like something really drastic. So I did have to do something. I had to get sober. I went to a rehab, but like that didn't change me completely. Like that changed one big part of me, but it started opening the doors for all these other things. And, I think just by being able to sit down, pick up a book. So for me, I like books for the most part, that are a bit older, you know, and so like that book, I mean, I have a whole bunch that I could list off, but, you know, and then the interesting thing is that guy, James Altucher, he and I wound up speaking on the same stage a couple of years later. He's become a friend of mine. He lives 6 blocks from me.
Oh, wow.
All these different things. And it just, you know, it's amazing. So my favorite quote of all time, I have this hanging right by my front door, is a Steve Jobs quote where it says, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards." So I believe that so many of the really, really tough things that we think are really hard, the most challenging times of our life, those are just dots. And, you know, people are also the dots that help us connect us to where we're going to be, where we want to be.
So how have you tied some of that learning into what you're doing now? Because you must be doing somewhat similar work with the executives that you mentioned to what you're doing now with Super Connected Media? Yeah.
So I had this marketing agency though, and so this was like the one that just like kind of imploded 6 years ago. And I was like, all right, you know what? I'm never going to do anything around marketing again. Like, it was such a bad experience. You know, it wound up being one of the best things that happened to me in my life, but didn't feel like that at the time. And so I took all this time just trying to figure out who I was, what I wanted to do, etc. And then I wound up building up a personal development and productivity company. And one of the things I'd started doing was meeting with somebody every single day. And I would meet with somebody every day. I would figure out what I could do to help them. And I would just share openly and honestly about where I was at in my life at that point. Mm-hmm. And so all these things, and just not looking for anything from them, which was different than I'd ever been. You know, I'd always looked for what I could get from somebody. So I started doing it, and I've still done this. So I've done this for over 6 years now, I guess. And and then I just started connecting people, because I realized I was very isolated. Even though I was around people, but like I would still like choose to like look at my phone or, you know, do all these other things other than actually having real human connection. And we need human connection. We, especially now more than ever, because we're so connected because of our phones, but we're less connected than ever because we rely on the phones, and we're these fake relationships and things. So I started meeting people. I started building up this company. It became successful. And then I just kept doing all these different dinners and bringing people together, especially entrepreneurs in the media, just connecting them. And about just February of 2017, this small mastermind group that I'm in, we call it the Dad Mastermind. It's me and 3 other guys, successful entrepreneurs and fathers here in New York. And we meet every 45 days or so. And they looked at me and they said, "Chris, why are you not teaching people what you know best?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" They said, "Well, anytime that we describe you to somebody, we call you our unfair advantage." Like, explain what you mean. They said, "Well, anytime that we need anything, get in the media, find the perfect partner for a launch, find a publisher, find an agent, you're able to take out your phone, text somebody, and make something happen in 30 seconds that would take a normal person 6 months." So I thought about it, and what it really came down to was relationships, and the relationships I'd built, and the way I'd always done things. And I'd always been really good at being able to get media publicity for myself. That's how I built my company's media and referrals. That was it. That was like my marketing. So I thought about it more and more. And then I helped out one of my friends in that group a lot with his big event that March. And I helped him out with no expectation of anything in return. And he said to me after, he said, "Hey, you need to start teaching people this stuff." And so we did an event together, and you know, from that point, that 1-day event became a 2-day event, became a 3-day event, which then became a agency, and you know, now we have you know, this amazing company. But it came from that little idea, and it came from me being willing to listen, and it came from all these dots connecting.
So I'm curious. because you probably don't know, I don't know if you know what you know about me at all, but so I wrote a book about referrals. It was a business bestseller, I don't know, 7 years ago. And so, the topics you're talking about, I'm very familiar with, without being modest at all. And even the research, from people like Robert Cialdini and so on about helping people. And I mean, there's all the, some of the best-selling books on like The Go-Giver and so on and so forth. So here's my question along these lines. I mean, I know I definitely understand exactly what you're talking about in terms of being real as a person, being honest. You said just doing your best to help people. And then, you said more than once, not looking for anything in return, which I think is most people's biggest challenge, is if they do a big favor for someone, I think it's innately, I think it's human nature that you almost can't not think, well, gosh, I know I really helped someone. And when when you understand the psychology, that most people innately actually feel an obligation to reciprocate. So here's my question: is how do you balance that with what you said at the beginning of the interview about asking for help? Because I mean, in other words, these meetings that you talked about having. Because I also know that when you're really you really try to help people out, it's unusual that people then don't say, what can I do for you? So talk through how it's worked for you in terms of helping others and then asking for help, because that's the piece I'm talking about, connecting the dots I'm curious about.
Sure. So there's a couple of thoughts. So one, I think getting rid of the expectation so that was like a big change for me. Mm-hmm. So going into a meeting and not having any expectation of what was going to happen. So that doesn't, now here's an important thing. That does not mean that you just throw out any like idea of like anything for you. That would be impossible. And that would probably also be foolish. I live in one of the most expensive areas in New York City. Like I'm not like, I can't be completely altruistic. So, but what I mean by that is, let's say that you and I are having a conversation, Matt, and I know that let's say I have an idea about how you could help me. Maybe to connect me with somebody or something like that. Mm-hmm. Sure. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how I can help you first. Mm-hmm. And maybe that'll be saying like, hey, Matt, what do you need help with right now? Or maybe it'll just be listening to what you're saying and figuring out and being like, oh, wow, Matt needs help. I think he should relaunch his book, and here's an idea for that, or blah blah blah. And maybe you say that, or maybe I identify a new line of revenue for you, or who knows what it is, or mm-hmm. I know somebody that would be an amazing person for you to connect with. So most likely, what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what I can do to help you first. And with no expectation. So I'm always looking at it from the long game. So, and then let's say that I'm able to help you. Then I'm going to ask you, hey, Matt, are you able to connect me with blah, 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 or, something like that. All right. So that's one specific example. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say there's nothing that I need from you, and I am still going to figure out what I can do to help you. Now, here's why, and this is an important thing. You know about the law of reciprocity, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So if I do something to help you, it's going to come back to me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that it's going to come back to me from you. It doesn't mean that it's going to come back that day, that second. It could be, who knows? But the more good that you're putting out there, the more that you're helping, the more that's going to come back to you. And mm-hmm. the inverse is also true. So that is, the biggest things are that, is looking at it from the long game. Because to me, a lot of people think building a real relationship is a lot of work and all this. It is, but it's also the shortcut. And number two is figuring out what you can do to help that person, but with zero expectation of anything. And three is just remembering the law of reciprocity and that it's going to come back. So another massive challenge I've had with, probably hundreds of clients over the years. I don't actually coach anymore, but that I ran into time and time and time again was
who to determine who to spend time with. In other words, my life experiences, I mean, almost everybody's quite nice and most people are fairly pleasant to spend time with. So how do you do that? Because obviously I'm sure you only get ever busier. So how do you determine, or how do you recommend to others to figure that piece out? Because otherwise you could arguably spend lots of time talking to seemingly valuable, worthwhile people and help them out. And arguably, I guess you would argue that good stuff is going to come back to you. But it doesn't always seem to work that way for some people. I've seen some people go out of business.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great point, because yes, I am not just meeting with every single person, or because I wouldn't get anything done and I would waste a lot of time. So what I'll do is I have a tool. It's called the Top 20.
Okay.
You can get it right on my website. So let's say we always have different goals or ideas of like what we want. So let's say that I'll use the example based on what I do. Let's say you want to get in the media, you want to get more publicity, you want to get more coverage, you want to get on TV, anything like that. So what I do is use this tool. So we call it the Top 20. So what you do is you sit down and you think about, who are the 20 people that I know right now in some way, no matter how loosely or whatever, that can help me to achieve this goal? So that can help me to get on TV, get in the newspaper, whatever it is. You just brainstorm and do a dump list of those 20 people. Now, oftentimes it's a lot more than 20, but I just use 20 as the minimum. So you write all these people down. Now you think about all the different people you've met in your life. It doesn't just it's not just your business contacts or this, like you think about people that you grew up with, your family, your kids, the people that their parents, like the kids that they go to school with, blah, blah, blah. Everything that you can think of, my personal trainer, like I'll think of everyone who I think can help me to achieve this goal. So you can do this with raising money, you can do this with finding more clients, whatever it is. You put that list down. Then you create another column and you give them a score of their influence level. So for example, if it's somebody who's an editor of a magazine, and you want to get in that magazine and you know the editor, there's going to be they're like a 9 or a 10 in terms of influence.
Sure.
Okay. So you just go down and you put that, and then so for example, maybe like your sister knows a producer at a local TV, so she would be like maybe a 4. All right. The next column is how likely are they to help you? So you give them a score of 1 to 10. So your sister should be a 10, hopefully, in terms of likelihood to help you.
Sure.
So her score would be like a 14 for that. So let's say that you know that editor, but you only met him like one time at a networking event. You guys had a great conversation, but you didn't really ever do anything to follow up, and you're connected on Facebook and LinkedIn. So maybe it's like a 2. So that person gets a score of 11. So all you're going to do is add up these scores at the end, and you start with whoever has the highest score. And you reach out to that person. Now, and you set up different meetings. So, and sometimes these meetings can just be a phone call or an email. So like your sister, let's say, we're using that example, you can say, hey, could you connect me to your friend because I really want, and then you just have your quick idea. Now, maybe that editor that is a 11 because you haven't done anything to nurture that relationship, you reach out and you ask, for a meeting or whatever, or you figure out ahead of time, wow, the editor entrepreneur actually has a book out. Let me go leave a review, blah, 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 and then let this person know and then say, hey, I would love to get on a call with you. I'd love meeting you, blah, blah, blah. So you're going to nurture that relationship before you ask for something. So that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. And is that what you were doing before you started your own company? So that in your intro it mentioned you work with executives at some pretty major firms. What were you doing with that? I got clients in 3 ways. So speaking, referrals, and publicity. So what I would help people do is how to build out their relationship, and then also how to help, because it doesn't matter what company you're at, what it is, that it works across the board.
And, these simple things work with anything. So it's just a matter of teaching people how to leverage what they have to get more.
And then presumably also to figure out what it is that the person you're targeting cares most about or is most looking for, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And it's funny because I find that when I ask most people that in an email, they rarely respond. So, I mean, would you typically say, oh, yeah, I see you're laughing. Yes. Normally, I've had a gazillion face-to-face meetings, but in other words, to get real meaty or people to share sort of generally real things, you have to get to talk to them in front of them, presumably, yeah?
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm trying to think. I never cold email people.
Sure.
But I get connected to lots of people that I don't know. So that's like the big difference. And yeah, so I'm not sure which question or if I understood what you're saying correctly, but yes, people share so much face-to-face, the more vulnerable you are. But in terms of like people responding on emails and things, like what I find is I get connected to, so whenever I'm asked like, what do you need help with, Chris? Usually I always say that my love language is referrals. So there's a great book called The 5 Love Languages.
Sure.
Referrals is not one of the love languages. I made that up. And so I'll always just ask people, I usually have a few things that I want. So referrals, introductions to people in the media that are, that have high positions in the media, referrals to potential clients for our agency or people that come to the events, and opportunities for speaking and stages and things like that. So from that, like for example, I just got connected this morning to a guy who runs a $500 million marketing company, and a guy who's close friends with him did a video introduction, sent it over to him and his partner for me because I saw him over the weekend and said, hey, I knew he knew this person. Can you connect me? Now, he didn't do it right away, so I sent him a text this morning and said, hey, just a reminder, can you connect me to blank? And he did it 3 minutes later. Now, if I just emailed or text that person out of the blue, they're never going to see it. Mm-hmm. So that's my big belief.
And and you said one of the keys for you is to make this a daily habit, correct? To kind of make a point to try and help somebody else?
Every day.
Yeah. At first, how did you keep that top of mind since it wasn't hardwired?
I just like with everything, I'll show you. I'm not going to show you because this is a podcast, but I have a habit tracker. So on my iPhone called Way of Life. It's a simple little app, and in it has all the different things that I do every single day. And so wake up without snoozing. I do that. I check it off. Say that today's gonna be the best day ever. So just like everything, like I need the reminder. I need accountability for myself. So one of the things in there is meet with somebody. So I know that I have to have that set up, and so it just becomes a part of my daily habit. Now, luckily, I travel a lot and I live in New York City, so it makes it pretty easy. And also, Zoom has become so good that there's not much of a difference, for this type of thing in terms of just being able to jump on a Zoom call. So it becomes, relatively easy just because it's become a part of my life.
Yeah. How many habits do you have on your tracker, approximately?
Yeah, over 20.
Yeah, it sounds like you have quite a lot.
Yeah. Most of them are in the morning.
I read that piece on your website about your morning routine, which I thought was really interesting. And I started using a tracker very recently, and I must admit, I think it's incredibly helpful.
So helpful.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I want to kind of go back to sort of almost where you started. So it's fair to say then that presumably once upon a time you weren't someone that was good at asking for help. Is it fair to? Do you still think that that's a big one of the biggest hurdles other people have is that they have hang-ups about asking for what they want?
I feel like about 95% of the people that I meet and talk to have an issue asking people for help. And I don't think that number is exaggerated. If anything, I think it's low. Yeah. And I rarely meet somebody who's really good about asking for help. One of my closest friends is really good at it, and I'm amazed. He has this big project launching, and I started telling him, hey, you should blah, blah. He's like, I'm asking this person, like, he's like, I don't care. I've done a lot. So, but most people, it's a real blind spot. And it's the reframe that I use for this is this. So do you struggle asking people for help, Matt?
Well, it's a funny question. I think the answer is sometimes. It depends what it is. I mean, I used to think it was a piece of cake, and then I realized that actually I was limited in what I was asking. Like I had a comfort zone with certain things. Yeah, I was pretty proud of, but then I realized that, it's based on sort of those ceilings that we hit.
Yeah, without a doubt. So the question I would have for you and for anyone that struggles with this, even sometimes, if we struggle, if we're not great at it always, then that means we probably struggle with it. Do you like to help other people that you care about or that you think are good people?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So the reframe is that when we don't ask people for help, when we don't let people help us, we're depriving them of that gift, of that feeling. And I think that's such an important thing to remember, because when you think of it that way and how good, like, you want to feel better each day, like you don't feel good, be of service to somebody. Like, you will automatically feel better. Now that can mean go to your homeless shelter, or that can mean just, pick up the phone and call somebody that you think needs you, or, needs to hear a voice. Like, it can be anything, but you be of service to somebody, your mood, your day will change. Guaranteed. The quickest way to get outside of yourself is to help somebody else. So when we don't allow other people to help us, we're depriving them of that gift, of that opportunity to be better.
And then I want to come back to faith, because I know we don't have tons of time left. So how have you been building that up? I mean, it sounds like, I know it's a work in progress, but that must come into this too, where there must be weeks or days anyway where you say to yourself, kind of, where is everybody? But doing my absolute best to help people, and gosh, there's not much going on. So how do you handle those types of days?
Yeah, I think that this is where, for me, the routine part becomes so important. So I wish that I could sit here right now, Matt, and say, all right, every single day I do all 20 of these things, and I do it perfect, and I never struggle at all. Unfortunately, that would be the farthest thing from the truth. And I don't want anyone ever listening to a pod and thinking that anyone ever has it all figured out or does it all. I've never met anyone, and I never will. And I think it's really important. So what happens is, the only time that I get to that place where I'm like, oh my God, why is anything happening? Is when I've stopped doing the things that I know work. Now, why did I stop doing them? Because they work so well, that I felt so good, that I feel like, oh, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to meditate. I'm so busy now. I don't need to read that book. Let me just wake up and check my email right away and do all these things. And then inevitably, I start to feel not good, and I start to not be grateful, and I start to get into fear mode rather than faith. Like, that's all that it really comes down to. Mm-hmm.
So there's a more challenging question I want to throw your way, because it sounds like you haven't gone into detail, and I haven't asked you, but it sounds like you obviously had some pretty rough things happen to you earlier on in life, and then you mentioned your business failure, which you interestingly said was one of the best things that happened. Mm-hmm. So as I do these podcasts and I talk to people, one of the things, and this is relevant to everybody listening. So my hope when I started this was to kind of be able to put forward sort of a recipe for people on getting out of your own way, even if you hadn't had a life-threatening situation, you hadn't had cancer or been hit, in a car accident, something, or you hadn't experienced significant childhood trauma. And the truth is, Chris, what I seem to be learning from this is that, there aren't too many exceptions to this, but when I think of most of the people that have gone on to do remarkable things, it seems like almost the biggest secret is that just about all of them have gone through hell, either as children or, whatever, as young adults or whatever, but they've experienced significant disadvantage or trauma. What's been your experience with other people that have, again, become self-made in terms of the success that they've had?
Yeah. So my belief from just talking and meeting with thousands of people is if everyone is at least 1 degree away from something, traumatic. So whether it's, and what I mean by that is I've never met somebody who hasn't been affected by something either directly or somebody in their family, a spouse, a best friend, that a 1 degree type of connection. Mm-hmm. So whether that's addiction. So I used to, I talk about addiction a lot now because I don't want it to be something that people feel shame around or, anything like that. But rarely have I ever talked to somebody and they haven't said that they've struggled or, a child or, somebody. Same thing with bring up if you've gone through a miscarriage, like you will almost never talk to somebody who has not either gone through, had a miscarriage or, somebody close to them. Same thing with death, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, big divorce, like all these different things that, that shape us. And I think that that's an important thing. It's an important thing to know that people are people are people are people, meaning that we all share like these same experiences. And, I think that we don't want the seemingly bad things to happen, but when you're able to look and say, all right, why is this? What's the lesson here? What's the reason for this? Life becomes a lot easier. So where I started to realize this was, I went to rehab. I woke up, I made this promise myself, I'm going to write something down every single day. I couldn't write anything down the first day. The next morning, the first morning I woke up there, I took out my notebook and I wrote, today's the worst day of my life. And it felt like that. I was broken, lonely, and I wanted to be there, but it still felt horrible. 6 months later, I wound up looking back and realizing, wow, that was the best day of my life. And I still believe that every single day, like with every single fiber of me, that's the best day of my life. That's the day I celebrate. But it didn't feel like that day, didn't feel like it the next day, didn't feel like it the next month. And, same thing with losing that company. I look back at that and I can say now, wow, thank God that happened. That was one of the best things that could ever happen. It did not feel like that during it. It was horrible. But what happens for me now is that perspective shift, that time just gets less and less. So something can happen now and I'm like, oh, wow, there's a reason for that. It could be horrible. Mm-hmm. And I can be like, all right, and maybe that takes me an hour, a day, but it usually doesn't take me that long. I don't get stuck in that. And, that to me has been the biggest, one of the biggest things for being able to just keep moving forward.
Yeah. So I know we need to wrap up shortly. One question I always love to ask is, I guess since you mentioned this day when you wrote down, this is the worst day of my life, who have you become since that day?
Well, I've become one sober person. I've become an actual person that cares about other people. I've become somebody who is filled with gratitude. I'd never said the word gratitude before. I am an optimist. I am somebody who can help and wants the best for people. I've become pretty much the opposite of everything that I was. And, it completely amazes me and I don't take it for granted.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Thank you so much. It sounds like you've done an absolutely amazing job of, in my language, like rewiring your brain, but of like turning things around and gradually bit by bit with the habit tracker and the focus and the reading. You've seen what you don't want. I suppose you've seen dark places, and I know we haven't gone into more detail, that probably would have been very interesting too. But anyway, again, you shared a wealth here about relationships. And it's funny, you've hit on these nerves around how disconnected people are and some solutions to that and the approach that works, which is, again, about not having expectations for others anyway. So how can people keep in touch with you or learn more about some of the things you're doing?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, CHRISWINFIELD.com, CHRISWINFIELD, or connect with me on Instagram, CHRIS WINFIELD, CHRISWINFIELD.
Brilliant. And then I've got to ask, so then what's something that's on your wish list at the moment that you'd love to ask for?
Oh, I am always, so again, my love language is referrals. So if you're an entrepreneur who wants to learn how to connect with the media more and really build unbelievable win-win relationships, then I would ask you to check out unfairadvantagelive.com. That's our event, 3-day event in New York City. It's absolutely transformational. We bring in, there'll be 120 top people in the media at that. It's absolutely amazing. So check that out.
No, that sounds really good, Chris. And I couldn't help but notice that you've got the next one coming up in early November. So plenty of time for people to check it out. Well, very good. Well, Chris, again, a massive, massive thank you for sharing your time and wisdom. Really, really appreciate it. For those in the audience, again, show notes are going to be on the website, which is matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. Otherwise, I always like to wrap up with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.